Hi, I'm Kristin Omdahl. I'm a creative entrepreneur embracing every aspect of life with artistic intention. Join me as I share the way I live and all the tips and tricks along the way. Allow me to inspire you to do the same. Please like, share, or comment on my videos. I'd love to hear from you. And if you subscribe to my channel, you'll be first to know when there's something new. We're going to make half double crochet stitches today. First, we're going to use worsted weight yarn, then we'll move on to sport weight, and then on to fingering weight yarn. We'll start by tying the yarn onto the hook, and we're going to do a swatch of 10 stitches, which means we're going to chain 11 to get started. So we'll chain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now, chain 2 counts as your first half double crochet, and if that doesn't make sense to you right now, it will after a couple of rows. So we're going to crochet a half double crochet into the third chain from our hook. The loop on the hook does not count as a chain, so you're going to count 1, 2, 3. We're going to crochet into this chain right here. We're going to yarn over our hook, insert our hook into that third chain from the hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. We now have 3 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops at the same time. That's a half double crochet. That first 2 chain that we skipped, it counts as our first stitch. So what I want to do is add a stitch marker to that chain, to that second chain, so that we remember that that's the first stitch at the beginning of the round. So now we'll yarn over our hook, insert our hook into the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop. We now have 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. That would be our third stitch now. Yarn over your hook, insert your hook into the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop. You now have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook into the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook into the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3. And I'll continue to do this across the row. Okay, we're going to set our work down so you can see what we have here. You count those 2 horizontal bars at the top as when you're counting your stitches. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then that chain 2 at the beginning of the row that we skipped counts as our first, so that would be our 10th stitch. So now we're going to start our next row, and our first stitch, and let me show you on here again, our first stitch is going to be a chain 2, and in the pattern when you're reading half double crochet, it'll say chain 2 counts as your first stitch, and that means that when you chain 2 now, it's going to count as this stitch, so that when you start your yarn over and insert your hook into the next stitch, type of a stitch, it'll be in that stitch, not this one. Not when chain 2 counts as a stitch. When it counts as a stitch, it means it counts as working into this stitch. So we'll now chain 2, turn our work. That chain 2 now counts as our first stitch, so we're going to skip the first stitch and we're going to yarn over, insert our hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, insert your hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And you want to do that across the entire row. And the last stitch is where it changes just a tiny bit, and that's what I want to show you next. Okay, so this is our 9th stitch. Let's see, let's make sure. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so here's the 9th stitch into that top V here. And now our 10th stitch is going to be worked into the top of the chain 2 space. Now, aren't you glad I put that stitch marker there? Wouldn't it be hard to remember where that is? And as a beginner, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you always mark your first stitch at the beginning of the round so that you can, in fact, we should have done that at the beginning of this round. That chain 2 we did at the beginning of the round, we really should mark it so that we can recognize it when we come back. Okay, so now we're going to single crochet, or sorry, half double crochet into that chain 2, the top of the chain 2. Okay, and now we can remove our stitch marker and we'll place it into the top of the chain 2 when we start the next row. So we're going to chain 2, turn our work. Chain 2 counts as our first half double crochet, so we're going to skip the first stitch because that counts as the stitch, and we'll half double crochet in the next stitch. Set our work down and add that stitch marker into the top of the chain 2 so we remember where it is later. All right, we'll continue on with half double crochet in each stitch across. Yarn over, insert your hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3. Okay, we've got 9 stitches now, and we're going to work into the chain, top of the chain 2 from the beginning of the previous row. Okay, again, it was so helpful to have that stitch marker there. It's very difficult to figure out where that is when you're starting. I can't tell you how many beginners I've seen, and including me, not be able to keep straight lines at the edge of your work because you can't recognize what the stitches look like at the ends of the rows. So this is a great, great tip for learning how to recognize those stitches and to work them properly when you don't recognize them yet. So we'll mark that top of the chain 2 as we start this next row. Okay, and so now I think you get the point here. So now next I'll show you how to do this on the sport weight yarn. Just so you can see how it looks a little bit different and how you just have to hold your yarn slightly differently. And there's really no explanation to it other than, yes, it's going to be different, and just play with it until it feels right. You're going to chain 11. And as we did previously, we're going to skip the first 2 chains, not counting the loop on our hook. Chain 1, chain 2, here's chain 3, yarn over your hook, insert your hook into that chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3. Insert, yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3. But before we go much further, I'd like to mark that chain 2 so that we'll recognize it when we get to the end of the next row. So we've done 3 actual stitches, so the one previous to that is our chain 2. We'll mark the top of the chain 2. There. And I'll thank myself at the end of the next row. So we'll continue on with half double crochet across this entire row, working into our beginner chain. Okay, so just like with the worsted weight yarn, we're now going to chain 2, which counts as our first stitch. So as we turn our work, we're going to skip the first stitch because the chain 2 counts as our first half double crochet, and we'll work our next half double crochet into the second stitch. So yarn over your hook, insert your hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on your hook. And then before we get too far along, I'm going to mark that chain 2 at the beginning of the row. So my future self can thank me. There we go. And we'll continue on with half double crochet across this row so I can show you how we look for the marked stitch. Okay, and there's the marked stitch from the previous row, which was the top of the chain 2. Yarn over, insert your hook into that chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. So there's half double crochet on sport weight yarn. So now we'll do it on the fingering weight yarn. We'll grab a smaller hook too. And tie our yarn onto the hook. We're doing exactly the same thing we did in the first 2 samples, just on smaller yarn and smaller hook. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We're going to half double crochet into the 3rd chain from our hook. The first 2 counts as our first stitch. And before we get too far along, I'm going to mark that chain 2 at the beginning of the row, as our first stitch.